Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Brown Bag. Let's see here. Today, we have Chi Ka. In this presentation, he will describe a recent and exciting research cruise to Antarctica led by Auburn professor and Schneller Endowed Chair Kenneth
Halanych,
as well as 4 other collaborating professors from across the nation. This 14-week expedition was made possible by 4 grants funded by the National Science Foundation for the purpose of studying invertebrate animals living in the waters surrounding Antarctica. One of the big goals of this cruise is to use genomics.
Yep, genomics text, yep.
Or DNA studies to better understand how climate change is affecting biodiversity and species distribution in an area of the world being rapidly transformed by climate change. As one of the 20 scientists who embarked on this important research journey, Chi will also share his personal experiences and research activities. Originally, his family is from Senegal, and he came to Auburn when he was 14 years old to attend school and has happily lived here ever since. He is not always the science enthusiast that he sees himself as today, but he's developed an unquenchable love for the subject through his education at Auburn University. As a student, he was inspired to study science after meeting passionate professors like Dr.
Christine Schnittke
and
Halanych.
Thank you. I apologize. And many others. His long-term goal is to continue doing research as a scientist and eventually teach science. He wants to use the skills he's gained through the program at Auburn to promote effective science communication, increase scientific literacy, and inspire others to pursue a career in science as he was inspired by the great people of Auburn University. And here we go.
All right, well, thank you everybody for coming to attend this talk. I think you all going to enjoy it. I'm going to be sharing my experiences of a recent cruise, a recent and very exciting cruise we did to Antarctica to do some studies over there, and we'll get details later on. But since she already gave that amazing introduction, I think we don't need to go through it a little bit over it again. So let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, here we go. So first, I just want to give an overview of our research vessel, icebreaker, called the Nathaniel B. Palmer. And here is a picture of it here. You can see, let me just change this to a laser pointer so I can. Yeah, and this is us actually about to board the ship. It is a massive ship. I'm going to tell you about it, more about it later on. So let's go ahead. So the ship is actually named after Nathaniel Brown Palmer, who was an American seal hunter and captain who was born in Connecticut in 1799. The ship itself was built in 1992, and it is still operational today. It is over a 300-foot, 7,600 ton icebreaker capable of breaking 3 feet of hard ice at about 3 knots. And this what allows it to do this is because it is equipped with 4 massive engines capable of producing 12,720 horsepower of propulsion. So it is an incredible ship indeed. And of course, it is also fully equipped with an onboard laboratory, and that is very nice because it allowed us to actually do most of our science on board the ship. So what about our objectives? So our objectives were, we wanted to study the invertebrate animals that live in the Antarctic Ocean. We wanted to collect samples from 43 sites around the continent, and then we wanted to use the data collected to study the effects of climate change on life in the Southern Ocean and also relationships of the different endemic animals in Antarctica. Endemic meaning these animals can only be found in Antarctica. Here is our science team, at least the first part of our science team. We have our prime investigators that actually made this research trip possible. First, we have our chief scientist, who is Kenneth Halanych. He is a professor at Auburn University in the Department of Biological Sciences. Then we have Kevin Kosot, who is an assistant professor at Auburn at University of Alabama, Department of Biological Sciences, and Alabama Museum of Natural History. And then we have Andy Mahon, who is a professor at Central Michigan in their Department of Biology. Then we have Sarah Gherkin, a professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage in the Department of Biological Sciences. And then certainly last but not least, we have Derek Learman, who is a professor at Central Michigan University in their Department of Biology. Then we have the rest of the science team, which were made up of students like myself. So I'll start from the left upper corner. We have Nick. We have Nick, who is a student at University of Alabama, who is a PhD student at University of Alabama. Then we have Mike, who is a PhD student at Auburn University. Then we have Jessica, who is a PhD student at Central Michigan. Then we have Emily, who is a student at University of Alabama. Then we have Damien, who used to be a student at Auburn University, but now has graduated. Then we have Rebecca, who just finished her PhD at the University of Alabama. And then we have James, who is a postdoctoral researcher in the Marine Biology Laboratory in Woods Hole. And then we have here below him, we have Kyle, who is a PhD student at Auburn University. And then here we have Megan, who is actually a collections manager at North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Then we have Will, who is a PhD student at Dolphin Island Sea Lab. And we have Kyle, who is actually an undergraduate researcher who just graduated, who just got his bachelor's from Texas A&M. And then we have, of course, myself. And then we have Nusrat, who is a collections manager at Auburn University Museum of Natural History. Then we have Candace Grimes, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Auburn University. And then last but not least, we have Caitlin, who is a PhD student at Auburn University. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of us, 20 of us total, as we mentioned earlier. And everyone here studies something different, like a different type of animal. And that allowed us to, combine all of our brain power to figure out what it is that we're looking at when we actually get to our sampling sites. So now I just want to give you an overview of our journey overall. Over 13 weeks, we traveled over 9,000 nautical miles, which for perspective is about 36% the circumference of the Earth, or about 70% the circumference of Mars. So it was a very long trip. Certainly the longest single trip I had ever been by far in my entire life. And one of the most fun I had ever been as well. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share a different screen just to show you where we have been. Yes, here we go. So I'm going to show you exactly where we went and the entire roadmap of the journey. So most of us started here in the South, either in Auburn University or University of Alabama. But as I mentioned, some of us came from Alaska, and then some of us came from Michigan. So, but we all converged and met in California. We all met in California, San Francisco, where we got on our ship and started heading south. We did not, when we initially got to California, so this was last year in September. So this was during the midst of, COVID and all of the restrictions that were kind of going on at the time. And so we actually had to stay there for 2 weeks. We stayed in California for 2 weeks, just quarantining before we actually got on our ship and started heading the very long trek south. So we went down past Central America, past South America, past the Galapagos Islands, which is here. And we kept going down past Peru, Bolivia, Chile. And then we finally ended up, after several weeks of travel through the Pacific Ocean, we ended up here in the southern tip of South America at a port called Punta Arenas. And it is there that we refueled and got more supplies for our scientific mission. And then we started heading back down south past the circumpolar current. So there is a very strong current that exists here. The seas were very rocky during this time. I am very happy that I do not get seasick. I'm very lucky, but I cannot say the same for everyone that was on the ship. Yeah, so, and then finally we started hitting the northern tip of Antarctica, and we sampled all throughout the northern region down south. And the farthest south we went is actually about here. So we got pretty far south. And the reason we could not go any further, as you'll see later when I reshare my PowerPoint, we hit some very, very thick sea ice that we could not break through. So the icebreaker can break through quite a bit of ice, but at this time, the ice had not yet melted enough for us to actually access certain sites that we wanted to, but we got very far indeed. So now let me go and share my PowerPoint once again. And we'll continue. So we have, so this is a GoPro video made by Candace Grimes of us going through San Francisco Pier 17. And we're actually, and you can see everybody is very excited in front of the ship, taking pictures. So our journey had just started at this time. So everyone was very, very excited about the mission going forward. And you can see the ship heading towards the very famous bridge. Everyone wanted to take pictures. You can see ships going by, carrying all of the stuff that we probably buy at Walmart and other places. So that was very fun. And then the journey south, which was a lot of ocean. I had never seen so much ocean in my entire life. It was very, very long, but very, very fun. We saw some very cool things throughout the Pacific. We saw so many dolphins, whales. We saw sunfish. I had never seen sunfish in my life. I had never seen a dolphin even before getting on this trip. And so lots of new things essentially for me. So, and that was very fun. But this seemed very long. It seemed very long because the site doesn't change. It's just this ocean seems to be an endless ocean everywhere you look, which is awe-inspiring in and of itself. So that was very fun. But then we finally started hitting land when we made it near South Chile. So we started entering the Straits of Magellan in Patagonia about 4 weeks into the trip. And these were, I mean, just the most beautiful mountains I had never seen, snow-capped mountains, and living in these, fjords essentially were, huge marine mammals. We saw fin whales, we saw killer whales, and we saw penguins even. We started to see penguins even before we got to Antarctica. So penguins can be found not only in Antarctica, but also in South America and even some places in South Africa. So they find their way around. But this was very fun. And like I said, everyone was in the front of the ship, as you can see, taking pictures, just very excited, because at this point, very few of us had ever been to this part of the world. And then when we finally reached the ice, here you can see we have 2 people in front of the ship, but you'll see more people coming out as they hear the ship crunch through the ice. It was quite a view. The ocean had completely frozen over, and so we had to essentially try to, you can see the ship being steered towards places that have less ice. The ice is a little bit thinner over there because we don't want to get stuck in the ice. And you'll actually see as this video advances, we get stuck in the ice and we have to back up and then try to use momentum to just move forward to try to go through very, very thick ice. So Antarctica is a very, very, very cold place, as we all can imagine. So you can see here the ship going, it has to back up and then try to go forward again. And we have to do this a few times in order to actually get through to the sites that we wanted to sample. But everyone was out just taking pictures. Here, since the video is sped up, you can't really tell, but there were also, sometimes we run past penguins and they all just kind of jump into the water, trying to just avoid the ship essentially. We see seals that are just kind of resting on the ice. And then sometimes if there is a large enough space that's not frozen, we see killer whales even hanging out. So it was very fun. But this is our ship running through solid ice right now, solid sea ice right now. So it was very fun. It was very loud. It was very loud. So you can see the ship getting steered, trying to avoid the thick ice, trying to go through thinner ice so that we'll have an easier time just advancing forward. But all of the sites that we wanted to get to were essentially like this. We had some places that were not frozen quite yet or had melted because we went, even though it was about to be winter back home, it was actually spring in Antarctica, and so the ice was starting to melt, and that's why we decided to go at that time. We didn't want to go in the dead middle of winter. We would not be able to get to any of our sites then. So, but we were able to get pretty far. And I have some pictures later to show more of the Antarctic landscape, but I think you can appreciate it here. I mean, it's just beautiful. The most, I mean, it just takes your breath away. As soon as you just step outside, you're like, it feels like you're not even on Earth anymore. It's just very, very, very unreal feeling. So you can see the ship backing up and then finding a new location, a less frozen part of the ocean to try to run through. But it was thanks to this ship icebreaker that we were actually able to get to the places that we wanted to go to. So let's move forward. I think you get the idea. So of course, our main goal was the animals, right? We wanted to study the animals, and what you're looking at here is called a pencil sea urchin, and I actually study sea urchins. And what I'm holding here is a pencil sea urchin. I guess it's called that because its spines kind of look like pencils, but these little brown things are actually not part of its body. They are colonial animals that live on top of the urchin. And there are some little white spots you can see here. They're actually clams that are also living on this. So this one organism is essentially a community of other organisms that coalesce and just live around its spine. So it's very, very cool. Another cool fact about this particular animal is that they actually take care of their young. So when they have babies, their babies ride on top of them. So we often pull some, we pull some individuals that had just were just covered in just babies all over it. It was the cutest thing. It was the cutest thing you'll ever see. It was very interesting. But this is a pencil sea urchin, and I have many more animal photos that we, ran across that I'm going to share with you here. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. Let's move forward. So I actually study, as I mentioned earlier, I study sea urchins, and sea urchins are related to like sea stars and brittle stars and feather stars. Okay, they're echinoderms, and the reason we want to study them is because every single gene that's actually found in the human can be found in the sea urchin, right? So they serve as a model organism to study gene function. So if you want to know what is this gene doing, well, we don't want to go, just studying it on people, right? That's not going to be very fun. So we study it on these guys instead, these little spiny creatures called sea urchins. And we learn a lot. I mean, we have learned a lot over, sea urchins have been studied since the 1600s. I mean, they were a very, very popular model organism. And this particular one here is actually is not an Antarctic species. It is a Florida species found in the Atlantic. Yeah, it's found in the Atlantic and also in the Gulf. And this red one here is an Antarctic species. So as you can see, there are some similarities, right? They're both very spiky and very round, but there are some important differences. And something that I am particularly interested in studying the Antarctic version of these sea urchins is that their young grow very, very slowly. And we want to know why, right? They grow very slowly. So, for example, the one that's found in Florida, it can go from a single cell stage to a swimming larva in about 12 hours. So that's very fast. Compared to the Antarctic version, it can go from a single cell stage to its swimming larva, but it takes 6 months to do that. So, and they're related species. So we wanted to know why, what's making it so slow. We have some ideas. Temperature might have something to do with it, but we don't think that's the whole story. So when I went, I collected some samples back, and we're actually going to do some genome sequencing to study exactly what's happening, what's different about them, and to try to help us understand why they develop so slow. And of course, everything we learn in sea urchins, we can extrapolate and just learn about ourselves. So that's essentially the goal. So we're just using these organisms as a model to understand humans and our life and how to treat diseases. And when things go wrong in our body, we want to know why. And to do that, we initially study it in these animals, okay? And then here is the Antarctic sea urchin once again. So the ship actually has a huge cold room we call Big Antarctica that we keep our tanks to keep the animals that we collect alive. So here is a tank I set up with the sea urchins inside. I collected some seaweed essentially to feed them, and you can see some of them just getting on top, just eating. And then here on this picture, I was collecting sperm and eggs from them because I wanted to study, the genes that are different, that are in their embryos that are not present in the other embryos, to try to compare to see what's different about them. And when what you're looking at here is an actual sea urchin embryo that has been essentially treated to glow where certain genes are expressed. So you can see individual cells here, right? You can see individual cells here, and this green is a gene of interest, and this purple is a different gene, and this orange is a different gene. So you can see these genes are expressed in particular areas in the body. They're not just everywhere, right? And that's intentional, and we want to know why that is. What are they doing in this region? Why is this gene in this region and not in this region, for example? There's a reason for that. And that helps us understand the function of these genes. And what you're looking at here is another animal called a polynoid. It's in the polynoid family. It's essentially a segmented worm called a scale worm. And you can see they're just all covered in mud and muck, and they live just in the seabed. They just go around in the seabed trying to find food and other things. They come in very many different sizes, varying sizes. Some are just, the size of your fingernails, while others can be the size of your arm. So they're very interesting creatures. You'll see a lot of alien-looking creatures as we move forward, for sure. And then we have this lovely video here of what looks like an alien that's coming to get you. But it's actually a feather star. It's a swimming feather star that can swim. So most feather stars just attach themselves to a rock and just sit at the bottom and just kind of filter feed. They wave their arms around and catch swimming debris. But this particular Antarctic species can get up and move. And so it was quite a sight to see. And then here we have a sea star, very, very interestingly colored. I mean, it kind of looks like ravioli to me. Why it's colored that way, we don't know, because where they live is pitch black. It's completely dark. So what is the reason for its color? And that is something that we also want to understand. Now, the sea stars, we saw some that were, the size of my hand, to some that had arms like 3 feet across, to some that were tiny, microscopic, like this one that you see here. This is actually a picture I took through my microscope of this very tiny, perfectly shaped star that we see here. They're very cute. They're very cute. But lots of sea stars live in Antarctica. And then we have what's called a sea cucumber, this wriggling thing that you see here. Very fun thing. It was actually quite powerful. Like when you hold it, it can overpower you. It can just kind of wriggle itself out of your hand. And then here I have a bunch of brittle stars just kind of wriggling around my hand. Very, very cool creatures, very cool creatures. And then here on the left, we have something called an amphipod. And amphipods, interestingly, are actually crustaceans that are related to pill bugs, which are land creatures, right? So roly-polies, I think some people will call them roly-polies, pill bugs. But yeah, those creatures also have amphipods. And these guys, I think you can see a little bit of resemblance. They can turn themselves into a ball to protect themselves. And you can see their eyes right here, very orange, bright looking eyes. And this is just one that I'm showing you that's this color, but we found some that were all sorts of colors and sizes. And part of our research is actually try to identify the species. So most of the species we saw, because Antarctica is so, just inaccessible and hard to get to, most of the animals that live there has not been studied. We don't know what, we don't know what their species, we don't know what they are. They don't have a name. We call it an amphipod, but an amphipod is a big, broad term. Like I said, that includes even pill bugs, which are land creatures. So we want to narrow it down, and we will do that by using genome sequencing and other techniques to actually study exactly where they are and how they're related to other creatures. And then we have another lovely feather star that's moving around. I showed this to one of my friends and they thought that it was a moving plant. And I don't blame them. It does kind of look like a moving plant. But they're very cool. They always take you off guard when you first see them just moving around like that. Very alien looking. And then we have another very alien looking creature here called a scale worm. Wow, look at that thing. Yeah, all of these creatures, seem like they are aliens from outer space. um, and that's what made this trip so cool, because we were able to see these creatures that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. And then here we have another annelid worm, which are segmented worms. And it's going to do something very cool. Whoa. Yeah. So, so this creature can actually regurgitate, essentially push its throat out of its body. And that's what it does to eat and dig. So I'm holding it right now in my hand, and it's trying to find a place. It's trying to find a place soft so it can dig. And that's when it actually regurgitates its throat. It literally takes its throat out of its body to eat. Again, just aliens from outer space is essentially what I call them. And then we have some other really cool creatures called cumasians, which are crustaceans. They look big here, but they are actually about the size of about the size of a grain of rice. So they're very tiny, very hard to see. So you can just imagine, compared to the big microscopic animals we were seeing, these guys were very tiny and very hard to spot. And I'm very proud of these guys, actually, because I was actually one of the first people to spot them, because we were learning about them. We were learning about them and how to identify them and how to essentially spot them, because they're just so small. But we found quite a few of them, and we do not understand them. We don't know much about their lifestyle, how they live, what they eat. So these are just new animals essentially to us. So they're very, very cool. And the person who actually studies them is Sarah Gherkin, which I mentioned a bit earlier, one of the 5 scientists that actually made this trip possible in Alaska. So they're very cool. We have another cumasian here. And the way their bodies are arranged, so this one is very, very beautifully colored, right? Again, they live in pitch black, right? So you would think that they wouldn't have much color at all, but because what's there to see them, right? There's no light. You need light to perceive color, and there's no light. So why are they colored this way is a big question that we're trying to answer. And all cumasians have this general body shape. They have this region near their head. So this is actually their antenna in the front. So their eyes are here. You can just barely see it. But they have a huge thing here called a helmet that most of their body is actually in. So they protect themselves with this shell, essentially, called a helmet. And the only thing that sticks out is a few legs and a tail that they can use to kind of whip around and swim. So they're very, very cool. Now, you may be asking, what was the point of this trip? So what are the consequences of this research trip? Well, I mentioned earlier, we're going to be using genomic studies to understand exactly how those animals are related to each other, and also to animals that are found elsewhere in the world, right? So even though Antarctica is so isolated and stuff like that, these animals have relatives that live elsewhere on Earth. And we want to know exactly how they're related. How long ago did they get to Antarctica? How did they get to Antarctica? And we can answer all of these questions by essentially looking at their genome. We can sequence their DNA, and we can just reveal all sorts of stories about, where they're from, and also how they're distributed, right? Distribution of animals is a very important area of study, because animals move around and they affect the environment, right? They affect where they live. Wherever they live, they have a heavy influence on it. And so we want to know exactly where these animals are distributed throughout the continent of Antarctica, throughout the ocean surrounding Antarctica. And then, of course, we want to learn the impact of climate change in the Southern Ocean. How is climate change actually affecting these animals, right? So if you're a tiny animal living, on the currents, in the Southern Ocean, if sea levels rise and oceans warm up, you might need to move because your food might move around, right? So climate change essentially causes everything to shift around and move around. Some animals, because it's so hot where they live now, they want to go to a colder place, right? And they move, and that place that they move to might not be their native home, right? And they may disrupt the environment that they find there, right? Causing some animals to go extinct. There is actually a particular crab that is found in the Pacific Ocean. It's not found in Antarctica, but now, because Antarctica has been warming up, essentially the ocean has been warming up, it's not as frigid anymore. These crabs are moving in, and they are actually displacing. There are no native crabs in Antarctica. And so these crabs are essentially moving in and starting a whole new ecosystem that disrupts the current ecosystem in Antarctica. And that's a bad thing, because that means we're going to be losing some animals, because some animals, if they don't adapt fast enough, which some animals just can't, they'll just go extinct. And climate change has actually caused a lot of animals to go extinct. And we want to slow that down. And to do that, we need to understand what's going on, how it's happening. And Antarctica is essentially a frontier for that. Western Antarctica, I believe, is actually the fastest warming place on Earth. So climate change is affecting the poles more than anything. It's affecting everywhere on Earth, but it's affecting the poles a lot more. So very, very, very important work. So now I just want to share some amazing pictures of the land and sky around Antarctica. So this is a picture I took one evening out in front of the ship. And you can see here, because Antarctica is located essentially at the bottom of the world, the sunlight is hitting it at an angle, and that kind of plays tricks on the sky, making it very weird colors, especially towards sunrise and sunset. The sky can be very strange, almost alien looking colors. And this is one of them. And you can see the sea. The sea is reflecting the sky. And so the sea looks red. I mean, this is ocean. It's blue water. It's supposed to be blue water, but it's not blue. So it's really cool. There are many scenes like this. And I'm going to share lots of pictures with you all, so you can just kind of get a feel of the experience, okay? So here's another amazing landscape photo of Antarctica with mountains. You can see essentially just glaciers kind of running towards the ocean. I mean, it's just very, very cool. The clouds form, because it's so cold there, the clouds actually can form kind of very low to the ground. So it's kind of eerie looking. The clouds are kind of like hanging, almost looking like they're kind of tethered to the ground. It's a very cool sight to see. And then as you move, further south, you see a lot more ice, right? It gets colder as you move further south. And you can just see here mountains as far as the eye can see. I mean, Antarctica is just a huge mountainous region. I mean, it's just an amazing place. And then we have some more just amazing, beautiful views. There was a lot of this. There was a lot of, just I would be in the ship, and then I would, go out on the deck to see what's out there, and I would just gasp because it always takes me by surprise of just the view, And these pictures don't even do it justice, but I can hopefully just give you a sense of kind of what it's like in Antarctica. And this is just a panoramic view of the place. So you can see glaciers in the background. You can see the ocean is looking very still because it's essentially locked in by ice from all sides. You can see the clouds just forming so low in some of these areas. You can see glaciers kind of running towards the ocean. and they carve the mountain as they go down. So it's very, very cool place. I have another very cool panoramic view for you here. Just an amazing landscape. My computer is trying to work very hard to show these videos smoothly, but you can see when the sun hits the ice over here, it's just very beautiful, reflecting on the ocean. And it's actually near these areas where we find most of the killer whales. They're very hard to take a picture of because it's just so brief. They just breach, they breathe, and then they just go back in, right? But it's very, very cool. Here's another picture of just mountains. Like I said, it's mountains as far as the eye can see, essentially. Beautiful sunset. And the further south you go, at some point, the sun actually doesn't set. So it just stays kind of twilight, you know, or dawn the whole time. It's very cool. It's very cool. Here's another view. You can see here icebergs kind of floating on top of the water. Actually, I think most of us know, like, what did they say? 90% of the iceberg is actually below the ocean, right? Here's another huge iceberg. Sometimes we run across icebergs that are quite literally bigger than our ship, and our ship is massive, right? But we run, past icebergs that are, could absolutely engulf our ship in terms of size. And again, that's only 90% of the iceberg. So you can only imagine the mountain that is underwater. It's amazing. And as we move towards more, colder regions, again, just moving south, the sea becomes more of a slushy. It's lots of loose ice kind of happening, and it's very loud. You can just hear the ship just kind of crunch through this slushy of sea ice. Here's another panoramic view. Just beautiful mountains. Very, very cool. At some point, we hit some solid ice. So the ocean was completely frozen over on the surface. And that's when our ice breaking capabilities come in handy. And I have some more photos to show and video. Very, very cool. And here is some video of the ship breaking ice. It was very cool for me to stand there with my phone trying to capture this ship just crunch through this thick sheet of ice. Here's the same view but at dawn, and you can see people get up very early to see the sights. At some point, we did run over a blizzard, and it was, you couldn't see nothing. It was just you couldn't see even 10 feet, 10 feet past the ship. It was just completely white. And the ship was just full of snow, and it took a very long time to actually melt the snow. All the decks were completely frozen over, but we made it through. Here's the last video. So you can see in some areas the ice is quite thick. Again, just beautiful skies. And now I'm going to show you more pictures, just amazing, breathtaking sights. So I took this photo early in the morning. I got up and I just wanted to see what it looked like out there. And I came out and this is what I walked out of. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing, amazing views. And again, the sky kind of, plays tricks in your eye because the sun is just at such an angle that the light just kind of interacts kind of differently with the atmosphere, and it creates these weird colors, Here's some more amazing landscape views. So even though much of our trip we were on the ship because we weren't there to study the penguins, right? We wanted to study the understudied animals, the animals that live at the seabed, right? But at some point we did get off on land, and we got off on one of the islands, and this is actually a crater. What you see here is actually a crater, a huge crater that goes. When the video restarts, you can see kind of the beginning of the crater, but this whole area is essentially a massive gap, I guess, for lack of a better word. You can see the edges of the crater here, for example. So let me restart the video. You can see the edges of the crater here. So the island we happened to get off of had many penguins and so many loose rock, and also just fossils kind of exposed. Like you can just go and pick up fossils off the ground, because no one lives here, and so the rocks, how they're laid, they just stay that way for thousands and thousands of years. So it's very, very cool. All right, and that is all I have for you today. I want to give special thanks to Candace Grimes for actually giving me those GoPro videos of the trip through the ocean, and also Sarah Gherkin, as I mentioned earlier, for the Kimoshian photos. She was able to just give me those beautiful photos to share with you all. So thank you. That is all I have for you today. I believe we're going to be waiting for a little bit for questions.
Yes, we got quite a few actually.
Oh, great. I'm excited.
So first and foremost, how does the ship captain determine how thick the ice is while you're trying to break through?
Yeah, so very, very good question. So we actually survey the areas with radar before we go to it, before we, make our trip there. We try to survey the area beforehand, and then we'll make our trip there, right? So the ship is actually equipped with a helicopter as well, and submarines as well. And so we thoroughly survey the areas before we go, because we don't want to get stuck in the middle of the ice. So very, very good question. Very good question.
Okay, so how did the mountains get there? And were the mountains there when Antarctica was a warm place?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a very good question. That's a geology question. Geology is not my specialty, but if one is to go to Antarctica, maybe you need, do a little bit of reading. So from my reading, I know that Antarctica essentially became isolated from the rest of the world about 30 million years ago. And so those mountains are actually continuous with the mountains of Chile. So the Andes, for example, and Antarctica are actually just one huge mountain range, one huge continuous mountain range. But because of plate tectonics and things like that, things can move around. So most of the mountains that are found in Antarctica, if they're not volcanic, then that means they were created through plate tectonics, right? The same way the Himalayas, for example, or even the Rockies were formed that way, in a similar way. So great question.
Let's see, what were the temperature ranges?
Oh yeah. So the temperature ranges were, depending on what part, depending on what part you were in the continent, it could actually vary quite a bit. The coldest we've hit was about -20 wind chills. And if you go out, I mean, your face just you can't feel, within seconds, you can't feel your face. So it's very cold. And the only reason the animals that live there, the only reason the ocean, I guess, doesn't freeze all the way down, the surface freezes, but under it is still liquid because it's salt water, right? So ocean, salt water doesn't really freeze as fast as, as fresh water does. And so even though the temperatures can be well below freezing, the ocean stays liquid, and which allows these animals to continue to live. But if you put your hand in the water, let's say, we pull some water up with some animals. If you put your hand in there, it's so cold, it feels hot. It almost feels hot. Your body gets confused, like literally. So yeah, very good question. The answer to your question is very, very cold.
Let's see. For the videos were done with the GoPro. Now the photos were done with your phone mostly?
Yes. So some of the videos, so like the videos you see here breaking ice, for example, these were actually done by my phone. So most of the videos are took from my phone. The only photos I got from Candace Grimes, and also, the only videos I got from Candace Grimes were the videos of us going through, the bridge, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge, and also our trek down the Pacific and stuff like that. So these were actually taken by my phone. So,
and as a nerd in this kind of thing, what kind of phone did you use?
I have a OnePlus. I have a OnePlus 6. So it's not, it's not the fanciest phone, but it has a very good camera. It has a very good camera, and it allowed me to take photos like this. So I'll take it. It's very good.
Oh yeah. And okay. I'm personally asking this because I like to ask silly questions just to
Sure.
see. Are sea urchins edible to humans?
Oh, yeah. Yes. They eat sea urchins in France. They have a name for them. I can't think of a name quite yet, but my advisor actually was joking the other day. He said that he was going to invite us to his house to have sea urchins for dinner. And I was like, no, thank you. I will not eat the animals that I study. I refuse to eat animals that I study. But yes, sea urchins are edible. Sea cucumbers are also edible. It just depends on what part of the world. Different cultures, for example, eat sea urchins. France, I know they have a very famous dish, which I just can't think of the name of right now. That is essentially sea urchin eggs, that they basically just eat sea urchin eggs, kind of like fish eggs, I suppose. And they eat it kind of in a similar way. So to answer your question, yes, sea urchins are edible.
But then after you see the babies sitting on top of them, you're like, how can you eat that ever?
Right, exactly. Once I saw, because not all sea urchins do that. And actually, your question actually makes me think of something interesting, because not all we know not all animals, take care of their young. Some animals just kind of lay their eggs and just kind of move on, right? But parental care is something that is very common in Arctic animals. And this is something we're trying to study as well, why this could be. We have some ideas as to why. We think that because this place is so harsh and just so cold, the young might have trouble surviving on their own. And so the parents actually invest in parental care just to increase their chances of survival and reproduction. So we see that in Arctic urchins, but not other urchins, for example, in warmer waters. So the urchins we study back, the urchins that come from Florida, for example, they just lay their eggs in the current, and the current carries them to wherever wherever. They lay millions of eggs. They play a numbers game, essentially. They lay literally billions of eggs, and they just kind of release it into the water. And the larvae, they just grow up eating plankton and other things before they finally settle down and grow up to be juveniles and adults. But the animals in Antarctica, it is very common for us to see some sort of parental care at some level. So.
And do the Antarctic urchins not reproduce as many eggs as?
No, yeah, wow, yeah. So that's very good. Yeah, exactly. So instead of taking the strategy of playing a numbers game, they take time and effort to produce less eggs, but more, better eggs, stronger eggs. You see, for I guess lack of a better phrasing, they produce more quality eggs and they produce less of them. And so overall, the energy is kind of equal in terms of how much effort they're putting into reproduction. So the pencil urchins, for example, that do take care of their young, one time I counted about 40 babies on top of it versus trillions. So big difference. So yes.
All right, well, that concludes our questions. And thank you so much again for coming today.
Absolutely. It was an honor, and it was very fun.